David Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I join in paying tribute to the 2 soldiers from the Parachute Regiment who were killed in Afghanistan yesterday? They're doing an incredibly difficult job in incredibly tough circumstances, and they have our full support. Let me ask some further questions, if I may, about Zimbabwe, because I believe, as I believe the Prime Minister does, there is a real opportunity for Britain to take the initiative. There's universal anger at the stolen election, universal support for the Leader of the Opposition pulling out of the race, condemnation from the UN Security Council, and, for a change, strong words from Zimbabwe's neighbours. Can I ask the Prime Minister about 3 specific actions? First, for the forthcoming G8, which President Mbeki will attend, will the Prime Minister push for a declaration that all states present will cease to prop up the regime and will refuse to recognise its legitimacy?
Well, I think you'll have noticed that the United Nations passed a very strong presidential statement on Monday. South Africa was very much part of that statement. It made it clear that the elections could not take place under present circumstances, and it called for an end to violence. I, of course, will raise this matter in every international forum. I raised it in the European Union at the Council last Thursday and Friday, and there was a very strong statement from the European Union. I have talked to other members of the G8, including President Bush, about the situation. I believe that the hope that exists for a peaceful outcome of the problems that we are now facing lies in the fact that, as he has indicated, so many African leaders, the governments of Zambia, Botswana, Tanzania, Angola, Senegal, Kenya, and the South African National Congress have made it absolutely clear that they cannot support the current regime, and they want the full civil and political rights of the Zimbabwean people restored. Now, I want us to work with the African Union and the United Nations. I believe it would be best if a joint delegation went to Zimbabwe. What we want to achieve is a peaceful transition, promise of support for a new regime, and an end to the violence that has caused so many deaths.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support very much what the Prime Minister has said. We too welcome the UN statement, and I also welcome what he said about the sporting sanctions in answer to his honourable friend. Can I ask him to clarify one point that arose from our discussions on Monday? The Prime Minister said he would no longer recognise the legitimacy of the Mugabe regime. Can I ask him a bit more about what that means? Because the Foreign Secretary said on Monday that when it comes to summits, and I quote, "it's not possible to ban Mugabe from attending until he's no longer the President of Zimbabwe." So when the Prime Minister says he doesn't recognise the legitimacy of the regime, what does he actually mean? What will the practical consequences be?
As he probably knows, we're bound by international laws in the question of the regime, but we do not recognise the legitimacy of the government. We do not believe that Mugabe has honoured the results of the previous election, and we do not believe that current elections can be free and fair. And we want to see a peaceful transition as soon as possible. And if we look back at the elections that did take place, then it was clear that Mugabe lost these elections. Tsvangirai was ahead. And it's also clear that the parliament in Zimbabwe has a majority against Mugabe. Now, what we want to achieve, and that's why what has been said by African leaders in the last few days is so important. For the first time, many of them have condemned both the regime and the behaviour of Mugabe. What we want to work for is that peaceful transition. I believe the statements made by the Secretary General of the United Nations, calling for an end to violence, offering his help in that, and the strong statements from President Kikwete of Tanzania are the best symbol of the way forward, which is the UN and the African Union working together for a change of regime.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister mentioned the EU sanctions. Can he absolutely confirm that when it comes to drawing up those tighter EU sanctions, our government will be specifically proposing a full visa ban for Mugabe, his officials, their families and associates, and financial measures that must include a full assets freeze on institutions complicit in the regime and a ban on their transactions? And does he agree with me that this is not just an issue for governments? Businesses and individuals who have any dealings with Zimbabwe must examine their own responsibilities and must not make investments that prop up the regime.
But he may also know that 160 individuals are under bans and sanctions as a result of decisions already taken. What we are now looking at is extending these bans to members, as he suggested, of the families of these people, that these bans will include financial sanctions but also travel sanctions. We do know the names of the individuals who are surrounding Mugabe at the moment. We know the names, therefore, of the criminal cabal that is trying to keep him in power, and we will name these individuals, and these will be part of the next stage of the sanctions. I agree with him also that businesses should look at their involvement in Zimbabwe. We have taken a decision that we will force through sanctions against the individuals that are part of the regime. We do not want to do further damage to the Zimbabwean people. But of course, where businesses are helping the Zimbabwean regime, they should reconsider their position now. I believe that the whole world has woken up to the evils that have been going on in Zimbabwe. I believe that the whole international community, with a few exceptions, is now united in calling for action. But what we want to see is an end to the violence and a peaceful transition in Zimbabwe, and that's why the efforts of the African Union and the United Nations are so important, and we will support them in their efforts and offer the Zimbabwean people help with reconstruction once democracy is restored.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On the Today programme,